What was your creepy unexplainable story as a child that was confirmed by your parents to have happened? In Mom's seaside hometown, there was an offshore decommissioned lighthouse. Even though utilities to it had long been shut off and the lighthouse was locked, it would randomly light up, clearly visible in all directions. No one could explain it. It happened so infrequently and at odd hours of the night that by the time officials examined the structure, there were no signs of activity. To this day, as I've mentioned here once before, the lighthouse remains mysterious and a bit creepy. I woke up one night when I was 12 because I dreamt that my older brother got into a car accident. I got out of bed and wandered downstairs to the kitchen to get something to drink. My mother was sitting there and asking me why I was awake. I told her, had a bad dream and need something to drink. I got a glass of water when it ringed at our door. My mother went to look who is there in the middle of the night. 2 police officers that asked if they could come inside for a moment. I couldn't hear what they were talking about because I was still in the kitchen and they were in the hallway. After the 2 officers left, my mother came back to the kitchen completely pale and told me that I should go to bed now. I asked her what's wrong when she informed me that my brother was in a car accident and she needs to wake up my dad and go to the hospital now. When I pointed out that this was a bad dream I had before waking up, she only looked at me for a couple of seconds. I prepared myself for comments like, "Don't be silly and go to bed now," but instead she said, "Me too." So basically, we both had the same fucking dream of my brother having a car accident, and we both woke up minutes before the police came over to tell us it really happened. My brother survived with some minor injuries and we've seen the photos of the accident in the newspaper the next day. It looked 100% like in my dream, to the smallest detail. The way he lost control over the car, where it flipped the first time and the tree it came to a stop. Even today my mother and I talk about this. Nobody else believes us when we tell the story. When I was a kid, my family lived in a blue house that was oddly shaped. One year the house got completely gutted and nearly destroyed by a flood, and they had to knock down a wall between the living room and kitchen. So after the flood, you could see all the way down the hall to my parents' bedroom door. This house was strange for lack of a better term. I was a terrible sleeper as a kid and would routinely wake up and just go into the living room and watch cartoons on low volume if I couldn't go back to sleep. One morning I'm out in the living room sitting across the chair with my feet up on a window. Don't ask me why, I was a stupid 8 or 9-year-old. From where the chair was, I could see just over the kitchen counter down that hall to my parents' room. A movement caught my eye. I looked up and saw the shadowy outline of a man walking towards me, kind of near to my parents' door. Thinking it was my dad, I said something like, "Hey dad, sorry if the TV was too loud." Dad is a notoriously light sleeper and would wake up from anything. Except there was no response. Within seconds my foot ends up going through the window, again not sure if this is related or I was a dumb kid, likely the latter, and I scream and my parents actually wake up to figure out what's going on at 4:30 in the morning. At this point I'm preoccupied, but realize much later that I definitely saw the outline of a man, but there was no way it was my dad because A, he came bounding out of their bedroom after my scream, and B, I realized the shoulders of that outline were much higher than what my dad's would been. Fast forward to a few years ago, we've moved far away from the blue house, and my mom and I are hanging out and catching up. For some reason the blue house comes up, and I tell mom that the place still gave me creeps and weird stuff happened there when I was a kid. Mom's response, "Oh, you must have saw the shadow man too." When I was 9 or 10, my dad took me to visit with an older hunting buddy friend of his. My parents were divorced and my dad lived in another part of the country, so while I had known this guy since I was a toddler, I didn't share the same common interests as either of them. The older friend was a gun dealer and had lots of catalogs. This was before the internet was in wide use to order bullets, magazines, guns, etc., and they often spent hours going through listings to determine what they wanted to order. We got there fairly early and my dad said that after an hour or two we'd all go to Hades for breakfast before going to shoot clay birds. Now I'm a youngin'. I don't care much about guns or hunting for sport, and I'm just incredibly bored, so I start wandering around the house, reading my video game magazines that I brought with me, and very quickly, that hour or two has passed, and they are still down there. I ask if they are going to leave anytime soon, and the friend suggests I check the refrigerator in the kitchen and see if there's anything I want to eat. I look through the fridge and find nothing. However, on the kitchen table I see an apple and decide that will be appetizing enough to hold me over. As I pick up the apple and prepare to take a bite, at that point his wife steps in and tells me, "Don't eat that. Everything in the bowl is wax." I tell her thank you for warning me and continue to wander around the house burning time until we can get going. Maybe another 30 minutes later I go back to the basement where they are going through catalogs and ask when we are going to Hades. My dad's friend asks if I'm still hungry after going through their fridge. I tell him that I was going to eat an apple, but his wife told me it was wax before I made the mistake. Both of them give me a blank stare, and after about 20 seconds of shock my dad explains that his wife recently passed away. I then go back through the house to try to find her to show that they were just joking with me, but sure enough she was nowhere to be found. Roughly 30 years later, before he passed away, my dad still insisted that I must have imagined it, but I didn't. She told me not to eat the wax fruit. So I don't actually remember this, but my mom told me about it. My grandfather died when I was a year old. Prior to his death, he loved to play with me and would make me laugh in this very specific way. The night he died, my mom heard me making noise. So she goes in assuming I'm crying, but I'm not. I'm staring at the ceiling, laughing hysterically just like my grandfather used to make me laugh. She's still convinced he came to say goodbye to me. I was very young when this happened, so what I remember and what I was told is the main scariness for this story. So my family was driving around the backwoods on NHME area in the autumn to watch the leaves fall. We were staying at some cottage and my family came to this area pretty frequently. We were coming back from somewhere when my mother started screaming at my father for stopping abruptly. In front of us, on a unkept back road in the deep woods of New England at a pretty late hour, was a traffic jam of quite a few cars stopped in all directions. I remember a lot of bright headlights. I also remember seeing my dad's face as he turned around so he could see where he was reversing the car. My mom went completely silent through this whole thing. I just remember my dad saying eerily calmly, "Oh, I hate traffic." He turned around and started driving back up the road we came down, and we started seeing cars going past us flashing their headlights. My dad just kept driving. The whole atmosphere went from, "Wasn't that a fun day?" to, "Let's leave." Even as a kid I went from annoying to quiet, just a thickness in the air. Cars started coming up from behind honking and flashing lights, and eventually they just turned off the road and we drove back to the cottage. Years later, I mean decades later, my dad and me were having a beer together. He says, "Remember up in the woods up north? We were driving around and we came to a weird traffic jam." I was like, "Yeah. Why?" I honestly hadn't thought of it since that night. My dad goes, "Well, your mother and I were pretty sure that was one of those ambushes where they block the road and try to rob you and leave you in the woods or worse. You don't remember the cars coming up the road after us, trying to block us in? Or the cars chasing us and beeping at us until we hit random route?" Well, kinda, but I just figured it was traffic or people being weird. He just kinda stopped talking about it after that and went on about how we should plant more trees in the backyard, but ones that don't drop leaves, because leaves suck. At my parents' house I used to hear my mom calling out to me when she didn't, and she confirmed she'd hear me call out to her when I didn't. That was a common occurrence. Also, whenever I'd be alone for a little while, if my mom was late from work or at the grocery store, I'd usually be in the main living room playing N64. I would oftentimes hear loud banging sounds from upstairs, as if a heavy piece of furniture tipped over. I'd go check and nothing was out of place. Both my mother and grandmother have confirmed similar experiences when they're alone in the house. There was also the time I was downstairs on my laptop. Everyone else was in bed. It was after midnight and I didn't realize just how dark everything had gotten without the lights on. I'm zoned out when I begin to hear what sounds like a murmuring from behind me. Like the low rumble you'd hear at a gathering when people are talking and you can't make out conversation. The hairs on my neck immediately stood up and my body locked up from fear. Tears ran down my face from the physical reaction my body was having. I refused to acknowledge it and kept staring at my laptop screen in silence. It took forever for my body to go back to normal. Sometime later I told my mother what happened and it freaked her out because she said she's heard the murmuring as well. I've always hated that house. One time my brother, his friend, and I saw lights in the sky that darted around like UFOs. We went to get my mom and she was totally nonchalant about it. "Yep, those are UFOs," she said, and went back in the house. Her response was so subdued that we figured she was humoring us and they weren't actually UFOs. Years later I asked her about it and she said she had to force herself to act calmly because she was terrified. When my family went to the Georgian mountain region, we rented a cottage. 2 bedrooms. So my brother and I took one and our dad took the other with his GF. I woke up in the middle of the night to 3 figures in the room, all standing in various places, none of which were visible from the entrance of the room. I woke my brother up and we screamed for our dad, but when he came into the room, he refused to look at the figures and just told us to hide under the covers. Wasn't exactly confirmed, but his refusal to look where they were standing after begging him was telling. Shit still scares my brother and I. My grandmother was a real estate agent in Rhode Island. I was staying with her one summer and she had to take me along to see a potential listing. It was a very strange house because it was circular. All the rooms went along the outside and connected to each other, and there was a center part with a little garden and open to the sky. She went up to the 2nd story and I stayed downstairs because I wanted to walk around the loop one time. The problem started when I had walked a full loop and I didn't see the stairs. I thought I must be confused, so I kept going to the next room and still couldn't find them. I started to panic, so I began running around the house as fast as possible, checking every room for stairs and there wasn't any. Finally, I sat down by the front door and started crying. A little while later my grandmother ran into the entryway room looking just as panicked as I had been and asking where I was hiding and why I was hiding and not answering her calling out to me. I never heard her calling out to me at all. Actually, the house seemed so still and quiet while I was sitting there that I was sure she had forgotten and left me there. We went home and didn't talk about it really. Like 15 years later I brought it up to my mom and asked if she knew anything, or was this a crazy childhood nightmare I'm remembering? She told me she remembered it clearly because my grandmother had called her and was absolutely spooked because she couldn't explain what had happened and she thought she lost me or I had been taken by someone while she was distracted. She had apparently been looking for me for a while. I still don't understand what happened really because the house wasn't even large or confusing to navigate. I still get chills when I think about it. Thanks for watching and share your stories. Don't forget to consider the idea to maybe think about potentially subscribing. Peace.